Hey everybody, my name is Nick Tossig, Senior Director of Marketing here at Spar Solutions. Really delighted to have two industry experts join us for this session on knowledge-centered service, Scott and David. For those of you that don't know Scott and David, two industry veterans, I would love to give them a chance to introduce themselves before we dive into today's session.
You bet. I'll jump in. I'm David Kay, principal of DBK and Associates. We are a boutique consulting firm that is focused on knowledge-centered service and helping organizations reap the benefits of this best practice in their service or support or other related organizations. We've been doing this for 22 years now, and it's been great to see how things have evolved and improved in those 22 years. Maybe we can talk about that.
Thanks, David. I'm Scott Badeau. I've been in the KM space for most of my career, mostly focusing on the support space, and a lot of the focus has been around search. I met David maybe 15 or 16 years ago on a joint project, and he's just a fantastic resource for knowledge-centered service and enabling the methodology and getting people excited about the benefits. So I'm sure he'll do the same with lots of people today as well.
Perfect. So
Got to say that Scott on his LinkedIn profile has knowledge management Swiss Army knife, and I think that's a perfect description of this man here, right? If you need it done, he can do it.
love it. Perfect. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, David. So obviously you two know a lot about knowledge-centered service, but for those of us who don't have as comprehensive of an understanding of knowledge-centered service, can you explain to us what it is and why it's so important in today's customer service landscape?
Absolutely. Knowledge-centered service, which we generally just call KCS, is an industry best practice for integrating knowledge management, knowledge work into the act of delivering service, right? Rather than treating it as a separate process. So it really becomes a new way of doing service where, rather than, okay, I'm going to answer a question and now, maybe somebody over there is going to write a knowledge-based article about what I just said, right? What we do is, in the process of helping customers, when they ask questions or need help, we will look in the knowledge base to see if there's already an answer there or something that'll help us get to the answer. If there is, great, we'll use it and not have to reinvent the wheel. If it's not there, then, in our normal course of note-taking while we're working the issue, we'll do it in a simple, structured way that means that by the time we're done helping the customer, we have 95% of a knowledge base article, which we can just finish and put in. So if it wasn't in the knowledge base, it will be when we're done. And if we find an article that it's the right article, but it's, say, out of date, or my customer needed more explanation about something, then we'll just update it then and there, so the knowledge base stays evergreen. Now, there are a ton of details about how to make all of this work with quality, but that's the big idea of KCS.
And I think having spent my last 10 or so years in sales focused on this topic, it really helps drive a lot of strategic initiatives that maybe the call center might have around agent efficiency and proficiency, making sure that once something is known, it's formally captured and distributed to everybody else so that we're not reinventing the wheel all the time. And then for things like self-service, the faster you can get that knowledge documented, the faster you can get it pushed directly to the customer. And then Dave and I have chatted a lot about this in the past, but I think we're both seeing that organizations who have either already gone down a KCS journey or are even starting one are experiencing quite a bit more benefits when it comes to generative AI, because the knowledge that's required to generate those answers it is already documented in the system, even if it's not perfect, or even if, you need to grab some of it from this document and some from another document. That's exactly what Gen AI is very good at doing. So I think, now is the time for organizations who are looking for, how to satisfy that request on, AI innovation, to look at methodologies like this that should give them benefits there as well as many other locations.
Okay, cool. An organization that hasn't implemented KCS, that hasn't implemented a knowledge-centered service, how do you refer to those kinds of organizations? Do you just refer to it as traditional service, or how would you describe those kinds of organizations, and how do they differ from an organization that's implemented KCS?
Well, for one thing, they're probably pretty unhappy with their knowledge base, right? So, I mean, just to be blunt, the traditional way of doing knowledge management, which is very centralized, controlled, right? You've got an author, a small team of authors that everything goes through. They become a bottleneck. Every day for them is, who am I going to disappoint today, right? It's because it doesn't scale. So this is why we've seen, organizations that are now on their 5th or 6th knowledge base, thinking that by buying some new technology, their process problems will get fixed. And of course, that's not true. So centralized, I might call it traditional, old school, as opposed to KCS, which is, crowdsourced and much more generative.
And I think when David and I first met each other, I'll point out that some of these organizations who had the traditional knowledge authoring approach were questioning why so many of their customers were going to third-party user forums. And it's because those third-party user forums have late-breaking, information. I mean, today's challenges are discussed today, tomorrow for fast resolution. And we still see that to this day. Certain organizations who have not adopted this methodology wonder why their knowledge base isn't the first location that people go to. Well, if it's dated information, or it's going to take 3 weeks to get that answer, people are going to go find the answer wherever they can get the fastest resolution. And I think it behooves organizations to provide that information directly on their portal, rather than risk error or similar on a different location.
So I think you both bring up some really interesting points there, right, David? Talking about how organizations think they can just go buy a new piece of technology and it's going to solve all of their problems. And we've already referenced AI, and some people may just think, hey, AI is going to solve all of these problems. And we've already discussed some of the limitations there. And it's got you pointing out, right, where you're trying to crowdsource information. If you can't find that on a knowledge base, you're going to a user forum, you're looking for that wherever you can get it. So this might already be resonating, with a lot of our audience. If somebody says like, okay, KCS it kind of sounds like the direction I probably want to take our knowledge function internally, where would be the best place for them to start? It doesn't sound like it would be with just buying new technology. So what would you all recommend somebody do if they want to pursue KCS?
First, the Consortium for Service Innovation, CSI, is the organization where members like us contribute to the practices, and we've been working on KCS for a bit over 30 years now, only about 25 for me. So we've learned a lot in that time, and we've documented a lot of it. And so if you go to serviceinnovation.org, or just Google Consortium for Service Innovation and click on KCS, you'll find a wealth of materials. So that's if you kind of want to roll your own. There's lots of great experience there that's available for you. I need to say that, from a shameless commerce perspective, organizations like ours lead workshops. We do both open workshops where, 1 or 2 people might get a feel for what KCS is like and how they might implement it in their organization, over 3 hands-on days. Or better still, we can come and do a design workshop with your organization where, yes, people get trained, but the more important thing is that we leave with an action plan, with decisions, and with a group of enthusiastic kind of evangelists for KCS in the organization.
Yeah, and whether you're using a guided service like David's or just looking through the practices guide on your own, I think a key is that while KCS is perhaps new to a lot of organizations and is definitely increasing in popularity, as David mentioned, it's 30 years of lessons learned, documented by some of the world's best support organizations. And so you can not only learn from their mistakes or learn from our mistakes, but also, employ what's worked really well at different organizations, and really get a leg up rather than having to recreate it yourself. The other thing I'd say is that it's like any methodology, in my opinion. You don't have to implement all of it. It's a very large corpus of possibilities, but you can start very lightweight with the specific aspects that work well for your organization or are more urgent for the challenges you're trying to solve, and then have a roadmap to continually improve year after year, rather than hit that typical plateau that you might experience, say, with a technology implementation. So, and I do think that the two go very well together. If you're looking to implement some new technology and you also want to focus on process improvement, that sort of thing, it's a great opportunity to parallel the two together.
Fantastic. We may have some knowledge practitioners watching this, and they may say, hey, this is exactly what I want to do. I've already done some research, but I understand that some people internally may have certain hesitations. So I want to ask two questions here. One, what role does leadership play in driving KCS across an organization? And two, let's say a leader is hesitant, regarding KCS, like, hey, we've always done it with our knowledge team. We've always done it in a centralized fashion. What might you tell those leaders?
So leadership is absolutely critically important and necessary. So if you don't have a supportive executive sponsor, somebody who understands, gets the vision, is willing to roll up their sleeves and lead change management for this, and give their managers and other leaders the air cover they need to implement what is a big change, then maybe it's best not to start. So really, executive sponsorship is critical. But then I would say that the line managers, the day-to-day leaders, are also essential, because it's so easy for them in this tyranny of the urgent that we live in service and support, where there are requests and escalations and things turning red and queues going on and service level, right? In that kind of environment, it's really easy for frontline managers to go into their comfort zone of, like, close the case, close the ticket, right? Move on to the next thing, rather than saying, hey, if we take an extra 3 to 5 minutes here to wrap up the knowledge base article that you've already been documenting as you've been working the ticket, then, I'm going to help 10 people in the organization downstream. When they get that same question, I'm going to help 100 or 1,000 people through self-service when they need to Google an answer, when they come to our portal. So it's very easy for frontline managers to, with the best of intentions, by focusing on what they're used to focusing on, which is get to the next ticket backlog, right? It's easy for them to, kind of smother the spark of KCS in an organization, especially as it's getting started and it's not a habit yet.
Yeah, and I'd say for the success or lack thereof I've seen with these programs is to make sure that you speak in the terminology that your leaders understand and are motivated or driven by. So if you go to the CFO or the chief customer officer or something like that and start talking about these specific KCS metrics, they might not understand what you're talking about and thus might not prioritize that within the organization, versus if you understand what the group is trying to do strategically and sort of lead to KCS as a possible solution. I've found that to be much more successful, not only in the short term, but also for long-term sponsorship, to where they have a 2 to 5 year strategy that they're trying to execute on. And you have these different aspects of the KCS methodology or playbook to pull from as that strategy matures. Speaking of the Consortium for Service Innovation, which David referenced earlier, there's a great webinar that Matt Seaman, the chairman, does specifically around executive sponsorship, with some pretty tangible action items as to how their members best obtain that support.
I think there was something interesting in both of your answers. David, I found it was interesting how when those frontline managers are attempting to be pragmatic, and move on to the next case, close this case, move on to the next one, they're actually preventing the adoption of KCS. At the same time, Scott, I find it interesting. It's like, hey, if you can understand what your leaders are focused on and speak to them in a manner that allows them to essentially be pragmatic, you can help to drive this forward. So it's interesting how in one case where you're trying to be pragmatic, right, it's actually impeding progress. And in the other case, it's like by being pragmatic and focusing on what will allow your leaders to be pragmatic, you can drive this forward. So let's just say that, right, leadership buys in. We're going to adopt KCS. We're going to move forward. Right away, people might run into some challenges. What are common pitfalls that organizations encounter when they move to implement KCS?
Well, I mean, assuming we've got the leadership thing taken care of, which is sort of a big if. The biggest barrier we see is people treating it more like a technology initiative than a change management initiative, right? So to implement KCS, you're going to need, in all but the smallest organizations, you're going to need somebody focused on it. You're going to need a program manager, or for very large organizations, perhaps even a program team, right? So, and this knowledge program manager, or KCS program manager, is not a person, just to be clear, who writes articles, right? There's somebody who implements the strategic change across the organization to enable the organization to generate and keep the content up to date and reuse it successfully and deliver it through self-service. So it's a very strategic role. So if you don't have somebody focused on it, you're going to get into trouble. I'm going to perhaps add some nuance to something that Scott said a few minutes ago, because people who know me in the industry know that if you want to set me off, say KCS light, right? So it's true, you don't have to do it all perfectly at once, 100%, but also picking and choosing bits of the practices to do, and I know Scott didn't mean this, but just to clarify that, doesn't work either. Because if, let's say, we say, okay, well, KCS is all about everybody contributing content. Go for it, folks. Have fun, right? It's the Wild West, right? You can imagine what quality is going to be like, right? You can imagine what consistency, and it's just not going to go well. So we do need, not all of it, not perfect. There's a phase over time, but we do need this interlocking set of practices that make sure that we're delivering quality content and that we're developing people to do that, and that we're respecting the change that's required in people's jobs, rather than just picking and choosing. So, KCS light is another way that folks get into trouble.
Yeah, and David does a great job kind of chunking it up into what you can accomplish, this year versus over the long term. I'll mention that from my perspective, two of the big things I've seen is obstructions with the technology. So in addition to the change management, you need to understand what changes your technology might need to make to adapt to that process. And then the big one for me and it definitely aligns to technology, is having the analytics to show the success of the program or lack thereof, so that you can make minor tweaks and improvements. But going back to the leadership concept we talked about earlier, I mean, if you've gotten your leaders excited about this program and invested in it, you're going to need to show some ROI, right? So we need to show not only the tactical analytics around how the specific features of the methodology are working, but how are we doing on general self-service adoption based on, pushing more knowledge? How are we doing on making our agents more efficient? So I think you need to look at it both from a tactical level, as far as how are these specific features working, as well as, how are we delivering on that strategy? And that's going to be the easiest way to maintain that leadership support and move on to the next phase of your program.
Fantastic. Yeah, and there's a couple things that you both said. I think it's interesting, Dave, where you say people set you off if they say KCS Lite, right? And I think we've all seen things where people pick and choose the parts that they like and they try to implement those activities. And it just makes me think of Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he's all about the paradigm shift. And this sounds much more like a paradigm shift than it does, hey, just kind of pick and choose, what you want to do from the smorgasbord of KCS related activities and hope it works out well. I also think it's interesting, and I'm curious to hear your take on this, right? People want to move quickly. And so oftentimes, when you're trying to implement something like this, you can't do it all at once, right? And so you have to be agile, you have to operate agilely. When you all sit down and walk people through a roadmap, where do you tend to start? Where do you recommend that they start? Where do you kind of see as like, hey, here's the midpoint, you're beginning to mature, and then what does a fully mature organization look like once they've implemented KCS?
So in the beginning, you need to do some planning and design. You need to, figure out how to make KCS work for your organization. As Scott said, what's the MVP technology we can launch with? What are the analytics that are going to allow us to back up those claims that we made?
Can I jump in and actually ask another clarifying question right here as you talk about that, right? Sitting down, we're talking about putting together a plan, putting together a strategy. In an organization, who should be on that team that's helping to inform that strategy and that roadmap? What types of people are going to sit down and say, evaluate, hey, this is the technology we need. These are the people we want in the room. This is the person we want to be that strategic program manager. Who's usually sitting down and having these kinds of discussions?
It depends on the organization. In some organizations, you've got a kind of service delivery group, and then you have, goes by many names, but an operations or enablement group. And often that enablement group is where knowledge management lives. So they probably already have people who are focused on it. However, it's essential then that you integrate with, that you work with, that you get input from the organization that is actually delivering the customer service. And, we want to get their managers on board. We certainly need an executive sponsor if it's a different one from that organization. But really importantly, particularly as we're thinking about technology and the workflow that, encompasses this paradigm shift, we want to get the people doing the work in these conversations too, right? If you say, hi, I'm from the enablement organization, and here's some great new technology and process we're going to train you on. And yeah, it kind of feels like more work for right now, but just kind of trust us, right? That doesn't work at all. We want the people doing the work involved in designing how the work's going to be done.
Yeah, I'd say if you can beg, borrow, or steal a fractional resource from your marketing team and combine that with the people actually doing the work to sort of tell this story in a broader way throughout the organization, that's where I've seen the most excitement come out of these programs, where it's no different than a product launch, right? It's, hey, this is coming. These are the people that worked on it, that you respect. And these are the amazing things that we've seen in sort of our early testing, that sort of thing. But we need you to become involved to, continue that success. Support personnel, including myself, right, are not always the best at marketing our capabilities. And so I think getting some help there to really, toot our own horn a little bit with humility to get the word out, it can be very successful.
Let me build on that very briefly. First, many 100% agree, and many larger organizations have a group. You may not know if you have such a group or where they are, but they have a group that's focused on change management. And in terms of getting fractional resources, we've seen a lot more success with organizations that can rely on something that is already in the enterprise, a capability there that they can use for the marketing and for making organizational change. The other thing I'll say, and I don't want to anticipate a question, but I also want to make sure that this doesn't go unsaid. One thing is that it's not a big bang, right? We don't flip a switch and roll KCS out to 100 or 500 or 5,000 or 15,000 people at once. We roll it out in waves, starting smaller, fine-tuning the process and technology based on what we've learned from that, and then rolling out to more people and more people. And this can be frustrating to execs, right? Because they're like, well, let's get it done. I want this project to be completed by the end of the fiscal year, right? But you really have to go slow to go fast, and understand that with a change this large, it is not something that can be sort of rammed down the throats of the whole organization. We need to proceed purposefully with a plan, wave by wave.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, David, because I would say that the number one challenge I've seen, having sold technology that either supports or partially enables KCS, is that exact issue. Okay, the technology launched on Monday, the KCS program launched on Wednesday, whatever it may be, and then we're done. That is definitely the number one issue I've seen, because it's either a classic scenario of bit off more than you can chew and have failures there, or I think it's actually a good thing that people are sort of chomping to see more, right? That's building intrigue and momentum and that sort of thing, so that in phase one, you've taken some learnings and applied those to phase two, and you're continually improving, rather than, again, biting off more than you can chew and having it be more of a failure. And it's always more difficult from my perspective with those clients to experience the failure and convince their leadership to give it another try than it is the iterative approach where you're learning before you expand.
And so it was a couple other questions here. So David, you mentioned, some larger organizations have change management functions inside of them. There are smaller organizations that don't have that. Can any size organization implement KCS, or do you have to be a certain size in order to implement it?
Absolutely. We've seen successful two-person KCS implementations. I happen to run a two-person company, and we really take advantage of the knowledge that we each create and share with each other, and reuse from something that I said 5 years ago that's relevant again. So the smaller the company, the easier the change management lift. And, particularly if you're a rapidly growing company, maybe there are only 5 of you today, but 2 years from now, there may be 50, right? And you will be really glad as you're onboarding those 45 new people that from the early days that you started documenting what you're learning as you're doing it. So it's great for small companies, works very well for large companies as well. And sort of the larger and the higher volume you go, the more you'll find that you are reusing existing knowledge, and perhaps you don't need to create or update knowledge nearly as frequently because you distributed that job across so many people. But yet, big or small, it works for all organizations. The only kind of organization I think it's not a good fit for is one where there really is no change or evolution. You've got the same 20 questions. You've got people answering them over and over again. And honestly, if that's your business model, I expect you've got other problems than knowledge management, right? And you're going to be automated because the world changes so quickly. So yeah, it's very broadly applicable.
And I'd say traditionally people assume that KCS is only for support organizations, but one of the commonalities I find is, if you've got, relatively speaking, a small group supporting a larger group of users, then KCS works great. And what I mean by that is, support, you might have, 200 agents and 200,000 customers. And so obviously you want to document that knowledge so that people can help themselves rather than, as David mentioned, ask the same question over and over. Other organizational types that this works really well for, and that I think is finally taking off, is customer success, right? How can I enable my customers to see this information that we as a success group have done for other clients or accounts, that sort of thing. Sales engineers, I'm finding more and more of them. There might be 3 sales engineers at a huge company getting questions coming in constantly, and they need to free up their time for the new and more complex issues. And so whenever somebody looks at group size, I would definitely encourage you to think about the benefits of gaining scale when the ratio of your group to the number of constituents you support is in that similar fashion.
Anything to add there, David, to what Scott said?
Well, I think that Scott's point is good, is that we do think about this as support and then service, because service is so support adjacent. But really, this way of doing work works anywhere that people are asking questions and you have a group of folks who are answering those questions. So sales engineering is one I'm particularly passionate about, and where the need is so great, because everybody's struggling with brain drain in that group. A group that I've seen be very successful with KCS is HR, particularly if there's some kind of shared services group where employees or prospective employees can ask questions, and having a knowledge base where they can go and have official answers that are written in the customer's voice that they can deliver, that is lined up with the centers of excellence in the rest of HR, right? And that allows employees to do self-service. It's really powerful. I remember being with an IT service management group, right, and to roll out KCS. And there were a few folks that were kind of skeptical, and I showed what a KCS article looks like. And one of the people said, hey, wait, that looks just like the stuff we get from HR. I'm like, yeah, HR, we worked together to roll out KCS a couple of years ago. They're like, oh, that stuff is great. No, let's do it, right? And so it was a complete change of conversation. So
Hey, David, can you elaborate a little bit on, I think this is a really good point, on the style differences of authoring in KCS, because you're sort of using, in many cases, what the customer originally submitted as the problem versus the legacy or traditional model of product engineering or whatever writing that information, and the immense benefits that come with that.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked and brought that up. Thank you. The KCS content just looks different. Like you can recognize it when you see it, for a couple of reasons. One is it's structured, right? If you've got a traditional break fix kind of article that's going to say, here's what's going wrong, here are the symptoms, right? Here's the environment in which it occurs, here's what this article applies to, right? Here's what to do about it, right? Here's the resolution. Why is it happening? Do you have additional information? All broken into sections, which makes it super easy to skim and to see whether it applies to you, and then to put into action, because what goes inside those sections are not, big, long, texty things. They're bullet points. They're a numbered series of steps. There is no fluff in a well-written KCS article. It's right to the point. Because honestly, imagine yourself, you've got an issue, it's frustrating and slowing you down, whether it's HR or your computer or whatever, and you need help, right? And you go on and you try and self-serve, and do you want to see an article that opens up and says, oh, we are very sorry that you're experiencing this problem. We understand the frustration it must cause, and we stand ready to help you with this easy to use knowledge base, right? Nobody wants that. You want to know, is this my issue and how do I fix it? And why did it happen? So I can be sure that that's right. So the structure, because, technical writing is hard. It's a deep discipline, right? We can't expect agents or engineers or analysts or technicians to just be good at writing, right? Here's a blank page. What we can expect them to do, though, is to communicate in words, right? And so a KCS article with the sections and the bullet points is really more like filling out a form than doing authoring as we would think of it. And one last point that you brought up, and thanks for cueing me on this, is that, if you're a product engineer or a traditional docs team, right, you don't really know how the product's going to be used. I mean, you have some idea, right? But you don't know the way that people are going to be thinking about what they're trying to do, right? So if you list a bunch of functions and explain how to use them, and somebody has a business problem they need to solve, and they don't know what functions they need, right? Your documentation isn't going to be very helpful. So in KCS, we capture the question the customers asked us in their words, and we capture what we needed to tell them to make them happy and successful, right? So it's all in very customer-centric language, so they can find it later in self-service, so they can find it useful.
A couple of clarifying questions there. And I love that you're focusing on the voice of the customer. How do you make sure you're accurately capturing the voice of the customer? Because so many people might be asking that question in a slightly different manner.
Well, the most important thing is you do it as you go, right? Because if you get asked a question, whether it's online or in chat or over the phone or however, if you get asked a question and then you decide, I should write a knowledge base article about that, you decide that 3 weeks later, right? Your recollection of what the customer told you is probably not going to be good. You're not going to remember what they actually said. You're going to remember what they should have said if they knew as much as you do, but they don't, right? So capturing all of this as you go is not only more efficient, but it really is the thing that enables capturing the voice of the customer and capturing what you needed to tell the customer to make them happy.
And I think, Nick, another thing that I see be really helpful to that point is a lot of people don't understand that KCS isn't just about authoring that new knowledge, but you have a article that is a very close fit to this adjacent situation, but you want to update it to include that additional context. To your point, that a different customer is experiencing a little bit different, maybe they're on a different firmware version, or it's the exact same problem, they're just describing it differently. And the methodology allows and encourages for that capture as well, which can be very easy for that agent to do, right? Because that they've used that article because they understand sort of the slight differences and how to tailor the solution for those differences, but then they can go make a very quick update to allow future people on self-service to get a more direct hit to that.
Yeah, I can see this really being a discipline that people have to build, right? Because if I'm just imagining myself in the shoes of somebody that's writing that article, it'd be really easy to put it off for 3 weeks. Like, man, I'll come back to that when I've got some time. I'm really busy trying to get to this next case or whatever it's going to be. The other thing, one other clarifying question here, David, you're saying KCS articles, it's almost like you're filling out a form, right? It's very, very structured. How do you develop those forms when you're implementing KCS and basically saying, hey, here's the structure we want you to follow? And it's I think some people could perceive that as perhaps being too rigid, or does that kind of emerge organically as you begin to implement this in your organization, or is it kind of both and just depending on the scenario?
It's a fantastic question, and Yeah, it's a structure you decide on in the beginning, and often you're implementing with technology, right? These symptoms and the applies to section are like literally their own fields in a knowledge base, right? So you decided up front. Um, Writing knowledge base articles is not a place where we especially want folks to become artistes, right? I don't want them deciding, what their favorite font is, and and to use red for important things, and right. We want it all to look simple and consistent, and like we're one company, we're one organizations that are delivering things. So one of the deliverables that you build up front is what we call a content standard. It's a very short. It's not a style guide saying you got to have 37 pixels from the logo to the right. It's because people shouldn't be thinking about that. They're filling out the form. But to say, here's words we use, here's words we don't use, here are the sections, in a how-to article, we're going to document what the customer is trying to do. We're going to document how they did it, right? So we got 2 or 3 types of articles, perhaps, and yeah, here's the structure for each. It's implemented in the technology. And so, yeah, I mean, we want people not to have to make things up as they go along, right? We want to reduce the cognitive load. See, we do decide that in advance now, of course. If we decide that things aren't working for us, then we'll make changes. But this is really why it's so important to have the people doing the work, being involved in designing how it's going to be done. Because, right, you don't want to just throw templates at them. We want to make sure that they know what's going to work for them and their customers.
I think this is a good opportunity to segue into AI, right? Because as you're talking about that form, it's just making me think, as we think about AI and how AI is driven by data, it's much easier to use structured data. And when you have that consistent standard implemented throughout your organization, it's going to be much easier to access that data and know it's there. So how do you guys perceive AI as it relates to KCS? What's your take on that right now?
Well, I think you said it perfectly, and Scott, earlier in the conversation, laid the groundwork for this as well. If you want AI programs to go well, it needs to be built on good data, right? On a good, trustworthy, up-to-date repository. And if that repository has knowledge-based articles that are about one thing, are structured, and don't have any noise words, right? Then you're really setting up your AI program for success. I was talking to a KCS program manager a little bit earlier, late last year, and she said, probably like everybody else, we have a whole bunch of AI pilot projects going on throughout the enterprise. And she said, we were able to get ours up and generating value more quickly than anybody else. And that's because we've been doing KCS for a year and a half. And so we had this repository. So I think I'm a little bit skeptical that in the very near term, AI is going to be able to look at bad and incomplete case notes about a case that's gone on for 3 months, right? A highly complex thing, and magically create the knowledge base article. That they can definitely help in that process, but that kind of meaning making is I think still a little bit of a ways away for AI technology. But this is absolutely, KCS content is actually absolutely what you want to feed large language models.
And if you think about something David said earlier, where KCS is focused on, just the facts, right? Versus sometimes people can get frustrated by too much fluff surrounding a company's content in general. So if you feed that fluff into an AI model, you're just going to get a bunch of fluff back. Versus what I've seen for, let's call it, some short-term bumps or short-term improvements of adding generative AI on top of a good KCS program is maybe the facts are there, but I, as a user, want to see it in a slightly different format. I like bullets instead of paragraphs, or vice versa. Or maybe I speak French and they haven't done the French article, but Gen AI can very easily automatically translate that for me. So there's a tremendous opportunity to sort of turbocharge an existing KCS deployment with some of that functionality, while also really building for your long-term success as well. And you're identifying based on demand, right? What are the issues that are coming in, and we're prioritizing closing those knowledge gaps based on that demand rather than trying to guess from a supply side standpoint in advance of a launch of a product or something like that. And then the thing that I found really interesting is, nothing's perfect, right? And so even the best KCS programs I've seen, there's still that occasion where there's an article and it doesn't work on self-service. And so it comes into the call center and the agent knows, well, for this article, I need to kind of supplement it with, maybe this product documentation that has a nice screenshot in it or whatever it may be. I'm kind of making up a very simple example. And Gen AI can do a fantastic job of sort of taking the context of what the customer is asking for, looking at everything that's within the company's knowledge set, and maybe combining together maybe 80% of the KCS article, because that's basically the facts, but maybe there's like a predecessor step that you need to do to prepare the cable modem for an update or whatever, and that step is in a product documentation. And so I've seen some tremendous deployments where that just all gets merged together quite beautifully. And the key of it is that structure of the KCS, right? Because you kind of know, David hasn't gone through the specifics of this, but the structure is kind of like, what are the symptoms experienced? What's the environment, so that we don't try to apply like a Windows solution to a Macintosh, problem, that sort of thing. And it goes through in a very sort of, I think, a chronological order of how the exception is experienced. And that allows Gen AI to sort of see what it needs to supplement there very easily. So that, for example, if that Macintosh person comes in, we might very well be able to take that Windows solution and tweak it a little bit to make it applicable to Macintosh and be in French and in bullet points instead of paragraph form. I mean, it's just amazing. And that's really what Gen AI is very good at, right? Way too many people are on the hype cycle of thinking it just creates knowledge, but it doesn't really. It takes your existing set of facts and tries to transform them into a format that the user is looking for. And I think it's just been excellent to see some of those KCS deployments be turbocharged by that.
Just two more questions here, or three more questions. I think I want to get some closing thoughts from both of you, because this has been a great conversation. One, what's one trend in knowledge management or customer service that you guys are excited about right now?
Well, I'm gonna not talk about AI because we talked about it a lot and everybody's talking about it. Although obviously that's there. What I'm seeing is an understanding that if we're in the business of delivering service and support, right, that our metric of value, going back to what Scott said about what executives care about, right? Executives don't care how many cases you close, right? At some level, they don't care, about probably any of the operational metrics that you're tracking. They care about what you're doing for the customers, right? They care about retention. They care about loyalty and referenceability. Of course, they care about efficiency and financial goals and, customer satisfaction. Those are the bigger and whatever strategic initiatives they have, right? Whatever their vision of the organization is. And so I've seen a change as perhaps younger people have been filling the role of frontline managers away from our job as an organization is closing cases to our job as an organization is to help customers receive and perceive value from what we're doing, so they stay our customers and they're good references. And once you take that case focused, tunnel vision blinder off, then all of a sudden the fact that you're doing 40 times as many interactions through self-service in the community as you are through cases, right? The fact that you're adding automation, the fact that you're giving great information to the development team so problems get engineered out of the product, right? Those are the things that you care about. And those ultimately have a much bigger impact on the organization and on the customers than closing cases.
Yeah. And I'd say focusing on the word trend, right? A trend is something you can either take advantage of or miss. And I think that the excitement that I have in knowledge management is for the individuals who are able to take the excitement and hype around AI and translate that into, well, in order to do that effective, we need to invest even more in these core knowledge concepts, because you're getting the attention of C-level individuals or even the board, reaching out and saying, what can we do to actually receive value from this new technology? And it's just been a complete 180 for me, at least the past several years of trying everything I could think of to get funding for like data cleanup and knowledge authoring and that sort of thing, and just sort of hitting in too many cases a dead end, versus now if you describe those as necessary activities as the fuel to this new engine that everybody's so excited about, it's pretty easy to now fund those initiatives. But I think people need to, we've talked about this multiple times, right? They need to speak in the language of the person they're selling the idea to get them, excited about the potential there. Yeah, so one of the things that I recommend organizations think about is, yes, there's going to be a little more overhead initially in documenting this knowledge, but then once you get that down and it really goes pretty smoothly, now you're going to be focusing more of your time, at least within the call center, on the more complex issues, the unknown issues, making today's unknown issues tomorrow's known issues, that sort of thing. And so from a call center standpoint, I would encourage sort of that marketing or change management effort to focus on a little bit of change today, and a little bit of perhaps heartburn in that change will free you up to do a lot more interesting things tomorrow and not be answering the same password reset or whatever it may be that nobody wants to do. And then from a self-service standpoint, you're not only going to shift a lot of that more transactional information to self-service so that you don't, as a call center agent, have to deal with that, but you're going to find that your customers are now more educated, right? Because they have access to more information, so that by the time they need to escalate to the call center, again, in my experience, it's a much more intelligent and much more beneficial conversation between those two groups of individuals. And so it just really elevates the entire support organization, in my experience, to something David said earlier, to something that the customers find a tremendous amount of value in, rather than the thing that I absolutely hate personally is channel shifting just for access to knowledge. That is absolutely ridiculous in my opinion. If you know a solution, push it to self-service so that I can handle it myself, and then only force me to escalate to assisted service, either because I need assistance in implementing that, or this is a new issue that the customer and the company need to work on together. That is a very pleasurable way of doing business in my experience on both sides of the transaction.
And David, any closing thoughts from you? Or do you
Absolutely.
what Scott said?
Yeah, it is. So I'm 100% support what Scott said. But the thing I'd like to step back about is like, why am I still doing this 22 years later, right? Why is this still exciting to me? And it's a characteristic that the consortium calls KCS being the great enabler. Most actions that we take in an organization are, good for us, but maybe they're annoying for the customer. They're good for the customer, but they create issues for our employees, right? You're always making these trade-offs. KCS isn't like that. We talked a lot about how KCS helps organizational goals, it helps loyalty, helps customers to continue to stay with you and to not churn. It helps make things more efficient and more cost effective. So it's great for the organization. it's great for the customers, right? Customers want to be able to go on Google or go on your site and help themselves. They want to talk to somebody knowledgeable who has official answer that you, right? So it's great for customers. But the thing not to forget is it's great for the people doing the work. As Scott says, the easy issues go away to a large degree. So what's left are the meatier ones, right? What most of your folks are going to consider the more interesting issues. And so the job gets upskilled, the job gets more interesting. People feel empowered, right? Because they get to write knowledge-based articles, and once they've gone through the right process, right, they can publish it out to customers on the web themselves. They're not answering the same old question over and over, which almost nobody likes. Certainly nobody that you want in your organization likes that. So it's one of these rare things in the business world that's good for the business. It's good for your customers, and it's really good for your people.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to start with selling the idea within your organization to leadership, right? Hey, what if I could tell you about this new methodology that saves money, saves time, increases customer adoption and satisfaction? You know, there's very few programs that do all those things while also making the employees that are enabling that process more happy, rather than a bunch of difficult work for them to do. So yeah, I think that's a great way to start the program and constantly think about it as well.
Fantastic. Cool. And I love closing on that notion that KCS is creates a virtuous cycle of value creation for everybody involved and elevating customer employee experiences. That's fantastic. Scott, David, thanks for the time today. Fantastic conversation, and look forward to speaking again soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for creating this opportunity and the conversation. Anytime I get a chance to talk with people like you and Scott about this stuff, it's a good day. So